Right, there's only going to be 2 parts today. I know what you're thinking. Change. I want my usual 3 parts, but it'll be okay. All right. Part 1 will be like an abridged version of the Torah portion. And part 2 is an extensive look at the Sabbath. So it's the parsha named after Moshe's father-in-law. I've mentioned in the past that Yitro was not helpful in coming in with his ideas on how things should operate within the camp. And some people think that this is a bit harsh and that Yitro was a righteous influence. And they point to this verse. If thou shalt do this thing, his suggestions on making judgments in the camp, and God command thee so, then thou shalt be able to endure, and all this people shall also go to their place in peace. So they point particularly to this phrase, and God command thee so. So from my introduction to the parsha last year, it's a parsha of 2 voices. One of the voices we hear this week will sound wise. The other one will be wisdom. The first voice is the voice of Yitro. Yitro will be intelligent and articulate. He will appear to be pleasant, kindly, and benevolent. His words will seem like pearls of wisdom. The second voice is the voice of Yehovah. So into the camp will walk Moshe's father-in-law, a priest, a man who will make a big religious show of sacrificing animals, a man with advice to give Moshe on how to run things. At no point are we given any indication that his words are from Yehovah. After his words were heeded to, the people rushed straight into the sin of the golden calf. They hearkened to the voice of a man and not to the voice of Yehovah. The thoughts of a man, even a man we respect and trust, are not the thoughts of Yehovah. Yehovah has made it clear. My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, says Yehovah. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So let no one deceive himself. If any among you thinks that he is wise in this age, let him become a fool, that he may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is folly with God, for it is written, he catches the wise in their craftiness. 1 Corinthians later. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. But no matter how you view Yitro, the man himself, the legitimacy of the message, it is Yehovah we are to shema and not the man, is not in any way affected. With that said, we'll go through why I believe Scripture points to the fact that Yitro's advice was not sound. As we said, he's intelligent and articulate. He'll appear to be pleasant, kindly, and benevolent. His words will seem like pearls of wisdom. He's a priest. He's a man who makes a big show of religious show of sacrificing animals. Now, to begin, last year we looked at the Sermon on the Mount and what it teaches about what we should be mindful of. So we'll have a look at that again. The Sermon on the Mount. Often we read just a few verses in isolation and don't follow the thread of what Yeshua is saying. So we'll begin. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide, and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. Wolves that look like sheep is a very serious warning. So let's make the first connection. The gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. Beware false prophets, they look like sheep, but they seek to devour you. Goes on to say, you will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. We looked at this before. Fruit in Hebrew is pray. It's what a man, Oresh, does, Yod, what comes out of his mouth, pay, and the letters that make it up. Zit is Hebrew for blossom. From blossom we get fruit. When we remember all the commandments of Yehovah to do them, that's when we bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Yeshua talked often of those who would be thrown into the fire. He says, the Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all lawbreakers, and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And of course, we read elsewhere in the Gospels, many false prophets shall rise and deceive many. Because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. There's all these people going to be on this mad, big, wide path. But he that endures until the end, the same shall be saved. So we continue with Yeshua on the Sermon on the Mount. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. We've seen this before. I delight to do your will, O my God. Your Torah is within my heart. It is his will for us to walk in his ways, obviously. And what is in your heart will be revealed. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of what? Lawlessness. So, anomia, those who do not walk according to the law. If you've been turning your ear from hearing the voice of Yehovah, then these words should be quite terrifying to you. Has Yehovah his great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in what? As shemaring the voice of Yehovah. Behold, to shema is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. Which is interesting, especially in the context of looking at Yitro. Lord, Lord, did we not do many mighty works in your name? And we read here, rebellion is the sin of divination, and stubbornness is iniquity and idolatry. Not really interested in any big shows of demonstrating to everybody how religious you are. It's what is in your heart that counts. But you're submitted, will you walk in his ways? So the connections. The gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. Beware false prophets, they look like sheep, but they seek to devour you and perhaps lead you along the way that leads to destruction. You'll recognize them by whether or not their words and actions are in accord with keeping the word. Many will think that they have done wonderful things in Yeshua's name, but they will have been led astray. And they will hear the words, depart from me. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. So that's the crux of the matter. How you respond to the word. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. It is always foolishness to hear the word and not to do it. So the connections, the way that is easy that leads to destruction. Beware false prophets. They look like sheep. They look cool. They look great. You will recognize them by whether their words and their actions are in accord with keeping the word. Yehovah will test you to see what's in your heart. Many will think they've done many wonderful things in Yeshua's name, but they'll have been led astray. And it comes down to whether or not you listen to Yehovah's voice and walk in accord with his word. What is in your heart will be revealed, because that's what counts, not big religious demonstrations. Many are on the wide path, and many will hear the words, depart from me. When Yeshua finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority, not as their scribes. The problem with the scribes was that they came with the wisdom of men. Yeshua came to proclaim the truth. Will you listen to his voice? Pilate said to him, so you're a king? And Yeshua answered, you say that I'm a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. And we know this is a reference to his word. We see in there that Torah is the truth. Ask yourself, which voice do you listen to? There are so many people who like to listen to the voice of men. They prefer it. Most people spend their whole lives going their own way. Maybe they don't listen to other people. Maybe they just listen to their own internal voice. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death. Obviously talking about the second death. The big main path that leads to destruction. Trust in Yehovah with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear Yehovah and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. So, do you listen to Yehovah? Ultimately, that's basically what this parsha is all about. Will you listen to Yehovah? The voice of a stranger, Yeshua said, sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. And when he brings out his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. Yeshua then went on further to say concerning his sheep, Yet they will by no means follow a stranger, but will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. At Mara, Yehovah taught us that the three keys to our survival are to shema his voice and his alone, to asar that which he proclaims as righteous to do, and to shema all his instructions and directions, that is, to guard and protect and to cherish them. We will shema, asar, and shema what Yehovah, will we shema, asar, and shema what Yehovah speaks to us? Or will we instead listen to and follow the voice of a stranger? Very important question. So Yeshua said, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. It seems like such a simple message, doesn't it? And yet the people, they were astonished when they listened to what he was saying, because he spoke with great authority. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. To warn it. Wide is the path that leads to destruction, and many are on it. The wrong voice following the wisdom of man. So what do? We trust in Yehovah, we build on the rock. Whoever despises the word brings destruction on himself, but he who reveres the commandment will be rewarded. I think it's incredible that all the way through Scripture we see this message. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice, Yeshua said. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And so to the parsha, and a look at this man, Yitro. Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moshe's father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moshe and for Israel, his people, how Yehovah had brought Israel out of Egypt. Now Jethro, Moshe's father-in-law, had taken Zipporah, Moshe's wife, after he had sent her home, along with their two sons. The name of the one was Gershom, for he said, I've been a sojourner in a foreign land. The name of the other was Eliezer, for he said, the God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moshe's father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moshe in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. And when he sent word to Moshe, he said, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her two sons with her. So Moshe went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him, and they asked each other of their welfare and went into the tent. Then Moshe told his father-in-law all that Yehovah had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them in the way, and how Yehovah had delivered them. He already knows what's gone on, but obviously Moshe is saying he did all this for Israel's sake, so that's quite important to note. And Jethro rejoiced for all the good that Yehovah had done to Israel, in that he had delivered them out of the hand of the Egyptians. Jethro said, blessed be Yehovah, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that Yehovah is greater than all gods, because in this affair they dealt arrogantly with the people. Jethro, Moshe's father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God, and Aharon came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moshe's father-in-law before God. The next day, Moshe sat down to judge the people, and the people stood around Moshe from morning till evening. And when Moshe's father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, what is this that you're doing for the people? Why do you sit alone and all the people stand around you from morning till evening? And Moshe said to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make them know the statutes of God and his laws. Pretty important job, you'd say, yeah? Moshe's father-in-law said to him, what you are doing is not good. So we can ask ourselves, on whose authority is it that he is speaking? Yitro continues, he said, you and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You're not able to do it alone. But he had been managing okay, hadn't he? Now shema my voice, I will give you advice, and God be with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God. So alarm bells should be ringing here. It is Yitro's voice, Yehovah's voice, not Yitro's, that we're supposed to shema. Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter they shall bring to you, but any small matter they shall decide themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If thou shalt do this thing, the suggestion on making the judgments in the camp, and God command thee so, then thou shalt be able to endure, and all this people shall also go to their place in peace. So that's the verse that people say vindicates Yitro. But as we've seen before anyway, people in Scripture, like Lavan, use great flowing words about Yehovah and yet do not act righteously. But let's have a look at this verse anyway. Let's see what it says in the Septuagint version of verse 23. This is the Septuagint that we must remember Yeshua quoted from. I'm not saying it's perfect. If thou wilt do this thing, God shall strengthen thee. Slightly different. We've seen that the Masoretic text seems to be influenced by those with agendas. There's a teaching that you can watch on the channel. Yeshua's divinity is hidden in the Masoretic text. And those with agendas who also, by and large, hold Yitro in very high regard. This is from Chabad.org. Jethro was originally called Jether because he was gifted with a keen intellect. He used it to seek out the meaning of life, and he acted on his conclusions. Thus, when Jethro accepted the Torah, don't know when this is supposed to have happened, but the Vav was added to his name, indicating that he was now able to reach beyond his own intellect and bring divine intellect into the world. Okay. God approved Jethro's plan. Not sure where it says this. True. This meant that the people would from now on be under the judicial authority of people beneath Moshe's stature. Nonetheless, God approved of this. If Moshe had remained the people's sole judge, some of them would have been overly intimidated by his overpowering presence and spiritual stature, and might therefore have considered themselves unworthy or outside the pale of the Torah's jurisdiction. Really don't know where they're getting any of this from, but I'm just putting it up there to show you that this Jethro, is revered amongst certain people. So we can compare the two translations, the older Septuagint that Yeshua quoted from, where it says, God shall strengthen thee, or the translation taken from the Masoretic text, and God command thee so. And if I held Yitro in high regard, then the Masoretic text would be my preferred rendition. That's all I'm saying. So returning to the Parsha, now obey, or Shema my voice. I will give you advice, and God be with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God. If you will do this thing, and going with the Septuagint, which I'm not saying is perfect, as I've said, God shall strengthen thee, and you shall be able to attend, and all his people shall come with peace into their own place. So Moshe shemat the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he had said. Oh dear. So Moshe chose men out of all of Israel and made them heads of the people, of chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And they judged the people at all times. Any hard case they brought to Moshe, but any small matter they decided themselves. And Moshe let his father-in-law depart, and he went away to his own country. So he went to his own country. He didn't want to continue on with Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, even after hearing about all that Yehovah had done for them. And this is the man that Moshe hearkened to. And in the book of Numbers, we see how things worked out. Numbers 11. Moshe heard the people weeping throughout their clans, everyone at his door of his tent, and the anger of Yehovah blazed hotly, and Moshe was displeased. And Moshe said to Yehovah, why have you dealt ill with your servant, and why have I not found favor in your sight, that you lay the burden of all this people on me? Did I conceive all this people? Did I give them birth? That you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a nursing child to the land that you swore to give their fathers? Where am I to get meat to give all this people? For they weep before me and say, give us meat that we may eat. I am not able to carry all this people alone. The burden is too heavy for me. If you will treat me like this, kill me at once if I find favor in your sight, that I may not see my wretchedness. So, from what we read there, we can tell that things aren't going very well, are they? This plan to help Moshe out obviously isn't really doing much good. So Yehovah steps in. Then Yehovah said to Moshe, gather for me 70 men of the elders of Israel. So now we have Yehovah's way to do things. Whom you know to be the elders of the people and officers over them, and bring them to the tent of meeting, and let them take their stand there with you. And I will come down and I will talk with you there, and I will take some of the spirit that is on you and put it on them, and they shall bear the burden of the people with you, so that you may not bear it yourself alone. The big difference here is the spirit of Yehovah, which puts me in mind of the words of Elihu in the book of Job. So far, Job's three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, have spoken to Job. These three will be chastised in chapter 42 by Yehovah for misrepresenting him. But Elihu has listened patiently as he is just a youth. And then we read, and when Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these three men, he burned with anger. And Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite, it always gets me that. I used to be a Buzite. And said, I am young in years and you are aged. Therefore I was timid and afraid to declare my opinion to you. I said, let days speak and many years teach wisdom. But is the spirit in man the breath of the Almighty that makes him understand? It's not the old who are wise, nor the aged who understand what is right. So it is the spirit in man, the breath of the Almighty, that makes him understand. Isaiah 5 says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and shrewd in their own sight. Which is a warning against replacing the wisdom of the word of Yehovah with the nonsense of man. Yitro's scheme failed to recognize that it is Yehovah who brings understanding and appoints men. It is foolishness when we fail to follow the wisdom of the word, when we fail to hearken to Yehovah's voice. And you might well be looking at me and thinking, but you're a man, why should I listen to you? It says in Ephesians 4, he gave apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up of the body of Christ, until we attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness in deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. He has given us teachers. He has appointed people to teach. And so long as I speak in accordance with Yehovah's word, then that's okay. But woe to those who put darkness for light and light for darkness. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes. So there will be consequences for Moshe's decision to hearken to the voice of Yitro. And we looked at this in Parshat Devarim. Moshe makes a speech in which we see that there is a connection between the sin of the spies and the appointment of the judges in accordance with Yitro's advice. And here we've got from Deuteronomy 1 some of the key words that are used: beyond the Jordan, desert, Arabah, roll up. And then we see this 11 days from Horeb. We also know that it was a 40-year journey. It came to pass in the 40th year, an 11-day journey in the 40th year. From the preamble, we see that what will be addressed is why an 11-day journey took 40 years. We know the reason for this to be due to the sin of the spies. So, why 40 years? According to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, a year for each day, and you shall bear your iniquity 40 years, and you shall know my displeasure. It is clear why the 11-day journey took 40 years, and we know why the people of the first generation, bar Joshua and Caleb, could not enter. They gave a good report, didn't they? So Moshe's first speech in Deuteronomy begins with a preamble that tells us that what is to come is going to be about entering the land. And in his speech, Moshe will address why he himself cannot enter. And you would expect the reason he gives is to do with the second time he struck the rock for water. He lifted up his hand and with his rod he smote the rock twice, and the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their beasts also. And the Lord spake to Moshe and Aaron and said, because you believe me not to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. But Moshe does not recall this incident in Deuteronomy 1 as the reason he cannot enter. He instead says, also Yehovah was angry with me for your sakes and said, you also shall not go in there. He cites the reason he cannot enter as being because Yehovah was angry with him for the sake of the people. And he reiterates this sentiment later in Deuteronomy chapter 3. O Lord God, you have only begun to show your servant your greatness and your mighty hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth who can do such works and mighty acts as yours? Please let me go over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, the good hill country and Lebanon. But Yehovah was angry with me because of you and would not listen to me. And Yehovah said to me, enough from you, do not speak to me of this matter again. So as we see in Moshe's speech, there is no mention of striking the rock for the second time in regards to his entering the land. It says, the Lord was angry with me for your sakes. And later in chapter 3, the Lord was angry with me because of you. Now, before Moshe's statement in verse 37 as to why he can't enter, he has a whole lot of the history of Israel's history that he can draw from. We've got the golden calf. We've got gathering manna when it isn't the Sabbath day. When it's the Sabbath, rather. And we've got Korah's rebellion, all kinds of incidents that he could have drawn from. But what he actually focuses on is in the first 36 verses of chapter 1 of Deuteronomy is the sin of the spies, which makes sense. But before that, it's the appointments of Yitro's judges in verses 9 to 18. So you can say, wow, why? So Moshe, looking back at the 40 years, points to the sin of the spies, but he also looks to his acceptance of Yitro's ideas and the appointment of the judges. So then we have, and the Lord was angry with me for your sakes. So it's a preamble, 11 days, takes 40 years. The appointment of the judges, the sin of the spies, and Moshe's reason why he can't enter the land. So to Moshe, there seems to be a connection between the sin of the spies and the appointment of the judges and his somehow being held accountable and not being able to enter the land. And if we actually look at the two bits of text, we've checked his recalling of the two events, we cannot help but see parallels. Here we see verses 8 to 18, the judges, compared with verses 22 to 31, talking about the spies. And we have similar themes going from one to the other in exactly the same order. Moshe hadn't intended it, but he had laid in the precedent in the events of the intermediate judges for the sin of the spies. And it all begins when he decides to shema the voice of man. So, Moshe shemas the voice of Yitro and thereby fails to shema Yehovah. What this represents is that he lacks faith that Yehovah will give him all the strength he needs to bear the people. He asks for intermediaries who have no business being there, judges that jeopardize the relationship between Yehovah and the people. The people in turn ask for intermediaries, spies, that get in the way of the loving connection between the people and Yehovah. Yehovah was going to lead the people indirectly, but now the people say, no, we need these people in between us and Yehovah, these spies. They fail to shema the voice of Yehovah, who tells them that he will go before them, that they may take the land. They instead shema the voice of the 10 spies. The result is that the people cannot enter into the land because they lack faith. And as he looks back over the 40 years, it all traces back in Moshe's own mind to the story of the intermediate judges. So the people can't enter the land. Why, in the end, can't Moshe go into the land? There's two answers to that question, because there's two reasons why Moshe might have been able to go into the land. He might have been able to go into the land just as an ordinary citizen like anyone else might have. Or he might have been able to go into the land because he was the leader that needed to lead them there. If you look at the book of Numbers, Moshe can't take the people in the land because of the incident when he hit the rock. If we look at the language used in Numbers 20:12, I'm not going to try and butcher it, we see that this is actually a restriction on him leading the people into the land. It wasn't a decree against him as a private citizen, he just couldn't be the leader anymore, leaving a tantalizing question. Maybe Moshe couldn't lead the people into the land, but couldn't he just go in as a private citizen? And that's actually what he asks for. Please let me go over and see the good land before the Jordan, that good hill country and Lebanon. But Yehovah was angry with me because of you and would not listen to me. Yehovah said to me, enough from you, do not speak to me of this matter again. But Yehovah does not allow even this, and the reason why has nothing to do with the hitting of the rock. Both Moshe and the people turn to worldly wisdom when things seem to get difficult. They fail to trust Yehovah. Yet all things are possible with God. Matthew 19. Looking at them, Yeshua said to them, with people this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. Genesis 18:14. Is anything too difficult for Yehovah? Isaiah 46. Declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times, things which have not been done, saying, my purpose will be established and I will accomplish all my good pleasure. It doesn't matter what the situation looks like, what the circumstances are like. It is never a good idea to fail to shema Yehovah's voice and to go after the wisdom of the world instead of just following his word. Just think how plausible Yitro and the spies seem with their worldly wisdom. Let's begin by taking a look at Yitro. Before offering his advice, Yitro offers sacrifices to Yehovah. He seems to legitimize himself. He said, "Blessed be Yehovah, who's delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians." Now I know that Yehovah is greater than all gods, because in this affair they dealt arrogantly with the people. And Yitro, Moshe's father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God, and Aharon came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moshe's father-in-law before God. So everything that he's doing seems to be, oh yeah, he's spot on, this fella. Then we have the worldly advice. It all seems to make so much sense. Of course Moshe can't judge all the people. But it does not matter how wise or spiritual someone appears. If they would lead you away from shemaring Yehovah, then they are not to be listened to. And then there's the 10 spies. Why would the people listen to them? Because these are our people. They have our best interests at heart. Of course we can't defeat people who are giants. And what's the result of all this? Yehovah decrees, none of you except Joshua and Caleb who followed him wholly shall enter the land. It doesn't end well when we listen to the voices of men. So let's look at the events from the perspective of the following verse. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Or faith comes by shemaring, and shemaring by the word of God. Moshe allows man's ideas in. The result of letting man's idea in is that the people lose their connection with Yehovah. He was their connection with Yehovah just as the Torah is ours. The people go on to demonstrate lack of faith and thereby cannot enter. Remember, faith comes by shemaring, and shemaring by the word. When we allow man's ideas to put obstacles between us and Moshe, the Torah, the word, then what results is a lack of faith. Without faith, it is impossible to please the Lord. All those who walk after the flesh cannot please Yehovah. Romans 8. For the mind that is set in the flesh is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's Torah. Indeed, it cannot. And those who are in the flesh cannot please God. Walking after the flesh and lack of faith go hand in hand. Now, consider all those leaders out there who would put men's ideas between the people and Yehovah and his word. And ask yourself, do you think Yehovah is angry with them in regards to the people? Jeremiah 23, woe be to the pastors that destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, says Yehovah. With Yehovah, all things are possible. When things seem too difficult, do not walk after the flesh and embrace worldly wisdom that goes against Yehovah's word. In all things, shema him. Do not be taken in by anybody who speaks contrary to Yehovah's word, no matter how legitimate they seem. Warning. If you see others making the wrong decisions, failing to shema Yehovah and going after worldly wisdom, do not let it set the precedent for your own behavior. If you want to please Yehovah, then shema his word. Don't and ah, just do what he says. Don't hesitate. Don't say, I'll just see what my other options are, and then go wandering off to listen to worldly wisdom. This will not please Yehovah, and this will not go well for you. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me, said Yeshua. Trust in Yehovah and build on the rock. So, chapter 19, and I know we're moving through it a fair lick because I wanted this abridged version to all be in part 1. So I hope I'm not going too fast for you. In the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. For they were departed from Rephidim and were come to the desert of Sinai and had pitched in the wilderness, and there Israel camped before the mount. Which is prophecy fulfilled from Exodus 3:12. He said, I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. So I wonder, as this is all going on, if Moshe remembers these words. But it just proves to us, doesn't it, that we can trust Yehovah. This is also the same place known as Horeb, which means dry or desolate, where Moshe struck the rock the first time and it brought forth water. And I always like to look at these pictures. It just, I don't know why, it always makes me go, whoa. The rock of Horeb, believed to be the rock with which Moshe struck. And we know that this is a rock that's in Arabia, don't we? It's 4 to 5 stories high. The local Bedouins call this the split rock of Moshe. So, enough water for about 2 million people and their livestock. Put your trust in Yehovah, even in the middle of the desert. The Lord makes a way and looks after his people. And here we have a picture giving you an idea of just how big this is. There's a man there next to it to give you some scale. This rock is split through the middle and displays the pattern of water erosion, evidence that numerous streams came forth in several directions. So there is a very good chance that this is actually the rock. The presence of water coming from the mount was a kind of forerunner to the revelation of Torah. The association of life with water is paralleled with the association of life with the word of Yehovah. Shua also pointed to himself as the source of living water when he responded to the woman at the well. Remember, he is the word made flesh. Shua answered and said to her, "Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life." And on the last day of Sukkot, Yeshua stood up and made reference to the rivers of living water, and he said, on the last day, that great day of the feast, Yeshua stood up and he cried out, saying, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scriptures have said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." Of course, we read in Jeremiah, "Be appalled, O heavens, at this, be shocked, be utterly desolate, declares Yehovah. My people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed out cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water." In other words, they've gone after their own wisdom, the wisdom of men, and it does them no good. Put your trust in Yehovah. Moshe went up unto God, and the Lord called unto him out of the mountain, saying, "Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, you have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself." And remember, these things happened to them as an example, but they're written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come. That's an interesting expression that we see there. Bore you on eagle's wings. In Revelation 12 we read, "The woman fled into the wilderness, which is a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1260 days. The woman was given 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she might fly forth from the serpent into the wilderness, to the place where she is to be nourished for a time and times and half a time." Trust in Yehovah, no matter what the situation might appear to be, no matter how things seem to be going. And then we have this verse 5. "Now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel." So Yehovah indicates that those of us who shema his voice and shema, cherish his covenant, are his special chosen people. And Moshe came and called for the elders of the people, and laid before their faces all these words which the Lord commanded him. And all the people answered together and said, "All that the Lord has spoken we will do." And Moshe returned the words of the people to the Lord. So they've said, "All that the Lord has spoken we will do." That includes obeying his voice and cherishing the covenant. When the covenant is confirmed in Exodus 24, we see the people once again making the same declaration, and thereby once again agreeing to obey Yehovah's voice. And that includes anything he might say thereafter. Exodus 24. "Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people, and they said, 'All that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will shema.' And Moshe took the blood and threw it on the people and said, 'Behold the blood of the covenant that Yehovah has made with you in accordance with all these words.'" So let's take another look at these verses. "If you will indeed obey my voice and cherish my covenant, then you'll be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. You'll be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to who? To the children of Israel." Children of Israel. Ephesians 2. "Remember that you were at that time separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenant of promise, having no hope and without God in the world." Okay, you were, but you're no longer. "And if you be Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise." And the message is, "If you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people." If you obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then you will be Israel, the holy nation. So we've looked at what it means to obey his voice. It's to fear him and to do all that he has said, to cherish all his commandments, to asar, to do them. And this is what the people agree to do. The children of Israel, also we see exactly the same language used here as is used in Exodus 19, 1 Peter 2:9. But you're a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. So you can say, what a calling that we have. But it's exactly the same as what we read in Exodus 19. And we are chosen, and we should be very thankful. But let us not forget that being Yehovah's holy nation comes with a great responsibility. It's not something to be taken lightly. We are priests, we kaham, we represent the Holy One, Yehovah. And we need to let that sink in and realize just exactly who it is that we represent. We need to realize that the most powerful way that we can proclaim Yehovah to the world is by not being like the world. And we can only represent him properly when our lives are surrendered to him, living according to his word, thereby holy, when we shema. King's favor is towards a wife's servants, but his wrath is against him who causes shame. The third word, which is in our parsha, or some people will call it the third commandment. Exodus 12, shall not carry the name of Yehovah your God falsely, for Yehovah will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Counting yourself as one of Yehovah's people and keeping Torah is not about joining a clique and going through the motions, doing a bit here and there so that you fit in. It's about hearing his voice and doing all that he has said. It's about obeying. It's about loving Yehovah with all you've got. Obey the voice of Yehovah means if he says it, you pay attention, and trusting him, you apply what he says in total submission to his instructions. And you do it because you love him. This is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. Yeshua said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. One of the things I love most about Yehovah is that he doesn't change. I, the Lord, do not change. Yeshua HaMashiach, the same yesterday, today, and forever. I don't have to second guess him. Like, oh, will he like this? Will he? Oh, I don't know. He's made it clear what he expects of me. I also love that he is faithful. I can be sure of what he has promised. Proverbs 1. Because I have called and you refused to listen, and it goes on, because you hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of Yehovah, but have none of my counsel and despised all my reproof, therefore you shall eat the fruit of the way and have their fill of their own devices. For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But whoso hearkens, shemas to me, shall dwell safely and shall be quiet from fear of evil. It doesn't change. The message never changed. Yeshua came. He said, everyone who heeds these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat on the house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Because I've called and you refuse to listen. It's the same message all the way through. Because Yehovah is the same. He does not change. Whoso hearkens to me shall dwell safely and shall be quiet from fear of evil. Deuteronomy 11. See, I am setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing if you shema the commandments of Yehovah your God, which I command you today. And the curse if you do not obey the commandments of Yehovah your God, but turn aside from the way that I am commanding you today to go after other gods that you have not known. Problem has always been that those with rebellious hearts go after other gods, gods that don't expect them to shema the commandments of Yehovah. But in shemaing, there is a great blessing. Deuteronomy 28. And if you faithfully shema the voice of Yehovah your God, being careful to do all his commandment that I command you today, Yehovah your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you shema the voice of Yehovah your God. Blessed shall you be in the city, blessed shall you be in the field. Blessed shall you be the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your ground and the fruit of your cattle and the increase of your herds and the young of your flock. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. Pretty coolly. But please note, we don't shema as a means to getting loads of goodies. We Shema because we love Yehovah. We keep his commandments because they are his commandments. They are who he is. We repent, we turn to him and his ways because we want him. He is our God, he is our deliverer, which is exactly what is written in the first word of our parsha. I am Yehovah, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of slavery. The world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. We looked at that before. To do the will of God is to Shema his voice. To do the will of God is to Shema his voice, to walk in his ways, to cherish his commandments. Those that do have the most amazing blessing, eternal life. As for man, his days are as grass, as the flower of the field, so he flourishes. If the wind passes over it, it is gone, and the place thereof shall know it no more. But the chesed, the steadfast love, the kindness of Yehovah is from everlasting to everlasting upon them that fear him, and his righteousness unto children's children. To such as keep his covenants, and to those that remember his commandments to do them. So to do his commandments is to Shema his voice. So what's being mentioned here is all these things that are written in Exodus 19. If you will obey my voice and keep my covenant. So the steadfast love of Yehovah is from everlasting to everlasting upon them that fear him, that keep his commandment, his covenant, and Shema his voice. Which is truly incredible, and yet we can believe it because he is true and because he is faithful. And it says in Psalm 147, Yehovah takes pleasure in those that fear him, in those who hope in his steadfast love. And we can hope in it because we know that he is faithful. And because we Shema his voice, and because we cherish his covenant. So, I like the simplicity of walking with Yehovah. He does not change. All I have to do is Shema his voice and it will be well with me. I like that. I think that is a great plan. And I also like being strong. Oh, look at this. Beast building. That'll get some eyebrows raised. Oh, he's talking about beast. Oh, we can't listen to him. I mentioned this to JP. He said, it's like, just think about the beast around the throne of Yehovah. That's a better beast to think of. So, 3 months to personal best and newfound thickness. I don't want to be thick. Thick enough, thanks. 3 types of torture. Oh, session 1 and 3, motor skill acquisition. Here we have a plan. So do this, and I'll get strong. Look at this plan, look at it. It's brutal. But cool. Do this, and I'll get strong. I like being strong. Right, come on, let's do it. Let's get stuck in, let's do the plan. Whoa, look at all this. What's going on? Okay, it says more weight, that's cool. I'm happy with that. What's this here? I've never done this. Isometric exercises. Seems a bit odd, but it's in the plan. It's cool. So I choose my exercises and just stick to what it says. Okay. And it tells me all about, oh yeah, it makes sense. And look, rest days. It's important to rest. 4th word of the of the parsha. And then there's this tendon strengthening. I'd have never have thought of that. It's actually quite brutal. I won't go into it, obviously. And then phew. I'm glad it's all been worked out by experts and it's all in the plan. People who know much more than me, and it's all in the plan. There you go. Ace. I just followed what it said. It was easy, really. It was all there for me. It was all made very clear. Yeah, I'm pretty delighted with the results, but I always had faith. That's why I just cracked on, and I always just stuck to what it said. And I knew it would all turn out fine, and it did. Deuteronomy 28. And if you faithfully Shema the voice of Yehovah your God, being careful to do all his commandments that I command you today, Yehovah your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you Shema the voice of Yehovah your God. The word overtake in Hebrew is nasag, to reach, to wax rich, to overtake, to hold, to get hold of, usually used in regards to your enemy when they overwhelm you. And there it is, Nesag, noon, sprouting life, sprouting plant, sperm, life, sheen, all-consuming fire, teeth, gimel, man on a camel, generosity, so overtake can be seen to mean life that consumes you with gifts generously. Ace. If I faithfully shema the voice of Yehovah my God, being careful to do all his commandments, I will be incredibly blessed. Cool. Praise Yehovah. Blessed is the man who fears Yehovah, who greatly delights in his commandments. His offspring will be mighty in the land. The generation of the upright will be blessed. Wealth and riches are in his house, and his righteousness endures forever. I can trust Yehovah. I can trust everything that he says. He knows much more than me. He's the expert. All I have to do is just, okay, if you say it, Lord, I will do it. And I trust that it will be fine because I can trust you. I have faith in you. So back to the Parsha. And the Lord said to Moshe, Lo, I come unto thee in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with thee and believe thee forever. And Moshe told the words of the people unto the Lord. The Lord said to Moshe, Go unto the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes. And be ready against the third day, for the third day of the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. And thou shalt set bounds unto the people round about, saying, Take heed to yourselves that ye go not up into the mount, or touch the border of it. Whosoever touches the mount shall be surely put to death. There shall not an hand touch it, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through, whether it be beast or man. It shall not live. When the trumpet sounds long, they shall come up to the mount. And Moshe went down from the mount to the people and sanctified the people, and they washed their clothes. And he said unto the people, Be ready against the third day, come not at your wives. So the people needed to be clean, as the manifest presence of Yehovah was going to be among them. We read in Leviticus 15, Thus shall keep the people of Israel separate from their uncleanness, lest they die in their uncleanness by defiling my tabernacle that is in their midst. And on the morning of the third day there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. And we read about this in Hebrews. It says, Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moshe said, I tremble with fear. And Moshe brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke, because Yehovah descended on it in fire, and the smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moshe spoke, and God answered him in thunder. And Yehovah came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, and Yehovah called Moshe to the top of the mountain, and Moshe went up. And Yehovah said to Moshe, Go down and warn the people, lest they break through to Yehovah to look, and many of them perish. Also let the priests who come near to Yehovah consecrate themselves, lest Yehovah break out against them. And Moshe said to Yehovah, The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you yourself warned us, saying, Set limits around the mountain and consecrate it. And Yehovah said to him, Go down and come up, bringing Aaron with you, but do not let the priests and the people break through to come up to Yehovah, lest he break out against them. So Moshe went down to the people and told them, and the people are terrified. And then next we have the 10 words. God spoke all these words, saying, I am Yehovah, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And so it begins. Next, then you have the rest of the 10 words. But we will come back to these when we do Parsha Vayet Hanan. As mentioned, we will take a look at the Sabbath in part 2. But picking things up in verse 18, the Parsha ends like this. When all the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoke, and the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood far off and said to Moshe, You speak to us and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us, lest we die. And Moshe said to the people, Do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. The people stood far off, while Moshe drew near to the thick darkness where God was. So that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. And if you want to know about fearing Yehovah, then I suggest, if you haven't seen it already, looking at the Parsha from this year, Shemot, which was only about a month ago now, I think. Psalm 25, Who is the man who fears Yehovah? Him he will instruct in the way that he should choose. His soul shall abide in well-being, and his offspring shall inherit the land. And the friendship of Yehovah is for those who fear him, and he makes known to them his covenant. So if you don't have an understanding of what it is to fear Yehovah, I suggest you watch that teaching. And Yehovah said to Moshe, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, you have seen that I have talked with you from heaven. Shall not make with me gods of silver, neither shall you make unto you gods of gold. And we know what's just round the corner, don't we? Bumf. Which, as I'm sure you'll agree, is not ace. Part 2 of Yitro. And we're going to be looking at the Sabbath. We're going to be looking at this verse, amongst others, obviously. On the first day you shall hold a holy assembly, and on the seventh day a holy assembly. No work shall be done on those days, but what everybody needs to eat, that alone may be prepared by you. So what we're going to look at is, can we cook on the Sabbath? Okay. Now, I've been presented with an argument that Exodus 12:16 implies that we have been instructed that whereas cooking is classified as work, it is permitted on a Sabbath. Now, the way I wanted to go with this is, the argument that I've been presented with is the most thorough argument I've ever come across in favour of being able to allow to cook on the Sabbath. So I've used the argument as a springboard to launch into the scriptures. Now, for the person who's made the argument, I'm aware, because I think I've been in similar situations, that it can make it seem like a personal affront if I say something contrary to the argument that they can recognise as their argument. But I'll just say to the person who made the argument that all my goal has been throughout this is to really, really dive into this in depth and to get to the truth. So I'll go through the points of the argument. Right, and where it's in italics, that is the argument, that is me quoting from the argument. There is a group of words mentioned in Exodus 12:16 that is mentioned for the first time ever. Holy, convocation, no work, or work is H4399, shall be done, H6213. As a reminder, H7676, Sabbath, hasn't even been mentioned yet. We will learn later in Leviticus 23 about Yehovah's feasts, and he's quoted H4150 yet, and the Sabbath. In short, Leviticus 23 shows us that his feasts include but are not all holy convocations, in which all include the instructions, no work shall be done, and his holy convocations include but are not all Sabbaths. So scriptures themselves show us that these holy convocations that are being mentioned here in Exodus 12 for the first time do include Sabbaths. Now, in the first mention of Yehovah's holy convocations, cooking is clearly defined as work, but it is just as clearly defined as work that is allowed to be done on those days. So just so we don't get confused with any terms as we go, H4150 translated feasts in most English translations of scriptures. I can recognise that already if you read it in English. Feasts, and the association with food is quite strong. Can be misleading, so let's look to the Hebrew meaning. So here we've got moed, appointed place, appointed time, meeting, appointed time, and it's from this other word here, H3259. Which we can see here, to appoint, assemble, meet, to appoint, to meet by appointment. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the feasts. The argument continues. As well you know, the hermeneutical principle of first mention implies that the first time Yehovah mentions a word, or in this case a group of words forming a command, Yehovah will reveal truths about that word or command that will not change later. Now, I would still say it is possible this instruction will change later, absolutely, but not without some really concrete scriptures backing that change up. Your argument has basically been that he declared cooking work in the first mention of no work shall be done, so the next time he mentioned no work shall be done, you can't do it. This defense is really not good enough. As well, you know the hermeneutical principle. I'm going over these points now. So this point of first mention implies that the first time Yehovah mentions a word, or in this case a group of words forming a command, Yehovah will reveal truths about that word or command that will not change later. Just to be clear, this hermeneutical principle is not something ordained in Scripture itself. There's nothing where the Lord says, I command that the first time I've used a word, just so we know. Never declares the hermeneutical principle of first mention. Yehovah doesn't. That said, the first time something is mentioned can indeed be revealing. If you truly want to understand the word in Scripture, though, you are best advised to investigate all its uses. Continue with the argument. Outside of these verses in Exodus 16, there really aren't any verses that talk about the subject of cooking on the Sabbath. There aren't even any offhand references to them cooking ahead of a Sabbath anywhere. That leaves the only verse that supports the idea that we can't cook on is this verse that says that we can. Hello, Charlie. If we really aren't allowed to cook on the Sabbath, why is the only verse that supports this teaching a verse that contradicts it? So let's go back to the first mentioned point. Just to point out, not that it has any real bearing on the argument being presented, but the word holy, H6944, Kodesh, does actually appear prior to Exodus 12:16. It appears here. Thus he said, do not come near, take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And it's that word there. This is just for the sake of being, looking at it very, closely. H6944 is from H6942, Kadash, which appears even earlier in Genesis 2:3 in relation to the Sabbath, as do the words that he said before, H4399 for no work, and H6213 shall be done. So they appear as well. They appear here, Genesis 2. On the seventh day, God finished his work. There's that word that he had done. There's that word. And he rested. And there's the word Shabbath. Obviously, related word to the Sabbath. On the seventh day, from what? From all his work. It's that word again that he had done. That's that word again. So God blessed the seventh day and he made it holy. There we go. That's the word related, Kadash, because on it God rested. He Shabbathed from all his, that word again, Melachah, which God created and made. It's that word again. That's that. So the word that's used here, which is related to Sabbath, is Shabbath. And it means to desist from exertion, used in many implied relations. Okay, we'll have a look at that word. Look at it later, but for now let's look to this. We'll look at the word rather for work later, but for now we're going to look at this word Shabbath. First, please note that we keep the Sabbath because of what is written about in Genesis 2. As is implied in our Parsha, the Parsha Yitro in Exodus 20:11. Remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. And we see these two words there for labor and work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to Yehovah your God. On it you shall not do any work. You or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant or your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made, this is why we're keeping the Sabbath. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and he rested. There's a different word there. On the seventh day, therefore, Yehovah blessed the Sabbath and he made it holy. So a quick look at this word for Shabbath, because clearly it is related to keeping the Sabbath. This word that means to desist from exertion. But as I said, if we want to get a clear picture, the best thing for us to do is look at all the different uses of it, because something that me and JP have been, well, I know JP, he mentioned it to me the other day, and it's been impressed upon me too. When we've got a Hebrew word, often we think we can get a really good grasp of what it means by attaching English words to it. But that's not often the case if we limit that. The best thing to do is to look at it from all the different applications. It gives us a much more full understanding of what that Hebrew word actually means. There'll be times, if you have conversations with people who are multilingual, well, they'll say, and then they'll just break into a foreign language, and they'll say, how do I say it in English? Because there's no real way of saying it in English. And often I think we take a Hebrew word and we try to understand it in a very limited way. So let's take a quick look at this word Shabbath and see if we can get a more full picture of what it's talking about. Noah builds an altar and Jehovah makes him a promise. Genesis 8 reads, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. It's that word, Shabbath. Exodus 5:5, Pharaoh said, behold, the people of the land now are many, and you make them rest from their burdens. Exodus 12:15, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, even the first day you shall put away, and it's this word again, Shabbath, leaven out of your houses, for whosoever eats leavened bread on the first day to the seventh day, that shoal shall be cut off from Israel. Exodus 16:13, so the people rested on the seventh day, so they Shabbathed on the Sabbath. Exodus 23:12, 6 days thou shalt do thy work, and on the seventh day thou shalt what? Shabbath. Thine ox and thine ass may rest. That's a different word which we'll look at. And the son of thy handmaid and the stranger may be refreshed. Exodus 31. Wherefore the children of Israel should keep the Sabbath to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign, an oath, a mark between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days Jehovah made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he Shabbathed and was refreshed. And the way he's refreshed is the word nefash, as in the root to breathe, to be breathed on, i.e. refreshed as by a current of air. Exodus 34:21, 6 days thou shalt work, but on the seventh day thou shalt rest. Same word. In eating time and in harvest time thou shalt, and again this word, Shabbath, rest. So it doesn't matter how busy you are, you Shabbath. Leviticus 2:3, and every oblation of thy meat offering shalt thou season with salt, neither shalt thou suffer the salt of the covenant of thy God to be lacking. And it's this word again, Shabbath. From thy meat offering, with all thine offerings thou shalt offer salt. And I'm talking about Yom Kippur. It shall be unto you a Sabbath of rest, and you shall afflict your souls. In the 9th day of the month at evening, from evening to evening, you shall celebrate your Sabbath. You shall Shabbath your Sabbath. That's what it's actually saying. So the Sabbath is the day, and what you do on the Sabbath is you Shabbath. There are many other times this word is found. We see it as I will rid. We see it, make the remembrance of them to cease, and the manna ceased on the morrow. And he put down the idolatrous priests, and he took away the horses, that thou might still the enemy and the avenger, that thou puttest away. These are all Shabbath, all the wicked of the earth like dross. So Shabbath, rid, cease, put down, take away, put away, still, lacking, and rest. The Shabbath seems to be about less in the sense that it is to take away, put away, lacking, put down, and rid. It's about ceasing. It's about resting. And this is what we're told to be doing on a Sabbath. Now in the fourth word found in our Parsha, we see that as well as resting, Shabbathing, as read in Genesis 2:2-3, Yehovah's rest, which is the reason why we rest, because he rested, is also described as this Nuach, H5117. We see it here. 6 days Yehovah made, and we saw that word before, heaven and earth and the sea and all that in them, and he rested. There we go, Nuach, on the seventh day. Therefore Yehovah blessed the Sabbath day, and he made it holy. So this word Nuach, to rest, to settle down, used in a great variety of applications. Here we go. The ark rested in the 7th month. This all gives us a picture of what it is to rest as Yehovah rested on the Sabbath, which after all is why we rest on the Sabbath. Here we can see how it's qualified in Strong's, to rest, settle down, remain, repose, have rest, be quiet. Now Exodus 17. It came to pass when Moshe held up his hand that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, it's this word Nuach, Amalek prevailed. Exodus 23:12. For 6 days thou shalt do thy work, and on the seventh day thou shalt Shabbath. We just looked at that word. That thine ox and thine ass may rest. Remember I said it was a different word. It's this word, nuach. And the son of thy handmaiden, the stranger, may be refreshed. It is something that we should be doing on the Sabbath, just as Yehovah is described as having done it on the Sabbath. Seventh day is a Sabbath of Yehovah thy God. This is Deuteronomy 5. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thine ox, nor thine ass, nor any of thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates, that thy manservant and thy maidservant may do what? That they may nuach, that they may rest, as well as you. So you're supposed to rest as well. You're supposed to nuach. There are many other times where this word is found. Here's a few examples. When the Spirit rested upon them, and the word there is nuach. Deuteronomy 12, and when he gives you rest from all your enemies round about, same word, nuach. 2 Samuel 21, suffered neither the birds of the air to rest on them by day. This word again. As for the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, same word. Correct thy son, and he shall give thee rest, and it be a delight to thy soul. So, nuach is not working. To rest as in to settle upon. Rest as in lack of conflict and trouble, as in rest from your enemies. Rest such as brings delight to the soul. So to reiterate, in the fourth word found in our parsha, in the parsha Yitro, we see that as well as resting, Shabbathing, as read in Genesis 2:2-3, Yehovah's rest is also described as to nuach, and this is something that we're called to do also, and our manservants, maidservants, and the rest. This word offers us yet more insight as what it is to rest on the Sabbath. We can take all these things in and start to get a picture of what the Sabbath is really all about. So back to the argument. So scriptures themselves show us that these holy convocations that are being mentioned here in Exodus 12 for the first time do include Sabbaths. Now in the first mention of Yehovah's holy convocations, cooking is clearly defined as work, but it is just as clearly defined as work that is allowed to be done on those days. So the argument as we read states that the first mention is important. And as I've mentioned before, this is not something that Yehovah has ordained, but it can be useful. I agree it can be helpful. The first mention of holy convocations to the generation of the Exodus does give us a great picture of what they are all about. And remember, this is the only word out the list that was actually the first mention. So holy convocations to the generation of the Exodus does give us a great picture of what they're really all about. And the word in the Hebrew is mikra, something called out, a public meeting, a rehearsal assembly, calling, convocation, reading, and it comes from the root kara. Kara literally means to call out, to meet, and is sometimes translated as to call or to meet, but by extension, to read, as in ancient times readings were done in assemblies, as we can see here in Joshua 8. There was not a word of all that Moshe commanded which Joshua read not before, and that's the word you've got there, kara, before all the congregation of Israel, with the women and the little ones and the strangers that were conversant among them. The chapter on feasts begins with mention of the mikra. And here we've got kara, and here we've got mikra, so we can keep it in our heads what a mikra is. And the chapter on feasts is the one that was mentioned earlier in the argument. It was Leviticus 23. And it says, and Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, the appointed times, the Moedim, which we looked at before, we often translate as feasts, which is a bit misleading, of Yehovah, which you are to proclaim, and that is that word there, kara, to call, a set apart gatherings, and the related word, mikra, kodesh mikra, holy mikra. My appointed times are these. The weekly Sabbath is mentioned next. 6 days work, melakah, we can see work here, occupation, work, business. And industrious are the two things I've got framed there, because we'll be coming back to what melakah means later. So 6 days work, melakah is done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of rest, a Shabbat, Shabbaton. As said, obviously Shabbaton is another word related to the Sabbath, and it's all about Sabbath observance. A set apart gathering, a Kadesh Mikra, you do no work. Kal melacha lo ta'asu. It is a Sabbath, a Shabbat to Yehovah in all your dwellings. Then we have the instructions for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And obviously the argument began with a section from Exodus 12, which is all about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Leviticus 23, talking about the very same day, says, on the first day you have a set-apart gathering, or Kadesh Mikra, you do no servile work. Now in the Hebrew that is, Kal melacha vodah lo ta'asu. And you shall bring karab, an offering made by fire, to Yehovah for 7 days. On the seventh day is a set-apart gathering. You do no servile work. And we have that expression again in the Hebrew. And it's worth pointing out at this point what avodah is. Avodah is work of any kind. It is related to the word abad, which appears in the fourth word, which is in Parsha Yitro, Exodus 20, and it also means to work in any sense. We see it here in the fourth word. 6 days you shall labor, 6 days you shall abad, which means work of any kind, and do all your melachah, which means work. But on the seventh day is a Sabbath, Shabbat to Yehovah your God. On it you shall not do any ordinary, shall not do any work, and the word there is melachah. And we'll look at the relation to Abad and Melachah later, but I just want you to be aware of what Avodah is and its relation to Abad, which is in the fourth word. So what is often translated as you do no servile work or you do no ordinary work is much more powerful in the Hebrew. Kal melacha avodah lo ta'asu. Kal, all, melachah, work, avodah, work of any kind, as we've just seen. Lo means do not in the Ten Commandments, or the 10 words as we call them. Lo is thou shalt not, so it means do not. Ta'asu is to do. So what it's saying is, we read as do no ordinary work. It's actually saying all work, work of any kind, don't do. So there it is. That's the Hebrew at the top, and that's how it's translated into English at the bottom, or should be translated into English. So Leviticus 23, talking about those days, it says, in the first day you shall have a holy convocation, all work of any kind, don't do. But you shall bring, offer an offering made by fire unto Yehovah 7 days. In the seventh day is a holy convocation, all work of any kind, don't do. That's what Leviticus 23, it's talking about the feasts, the same feast there that is mentioned in Exodus 12. That's what it's actually saying. So from the first mention in Scripture, we should get a good idea of what a mikra is all about. And we saw what a mikra is. It's a called out assembly. Just as we got a good idea of what the Sabbath is all about from when we read there. Seventh day, God finished his work, all that he'd done, and he rested. The seventh day, from all his melachah that he had done, he blessed the seventh day, made it holy. Because, why? Because he shabbathed from all his work, which we've seen as well also. He nuacht. The two things go hand in hand, which God created and he made. So I think the context of this first mention of Mikra, H4744, is very useful for our understanding its meaning. Exodus 12:16 says, in the first day there shall be a holy convocation. There we go, for Mikra. And in the seventh day there shall be a holy convocation, Mikra, to you. No manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat, that only may be done for you. And as we pointed out, this is not the first mention of either holy work or being done, but it is the first mention of Mikra. So the first and 7 days are to be a holy convocation. We've just read it in Exodus 12:16. A gathering, a called assembly. So let's look to the accounts in Exodus for the context. On the first day there was supposed to be a gathering. Do we see this? Exodus 12:37. The people of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. So Ramses was a place in Goshen, or rather the land of Goshen. Ramses to Goshen, the distance between these two places was not so great. Ramses to Succoth is estimated was about 8 miles. So it seems that they assembled on the first day, in Ramses and also possibly in Succoth. So there was a gathering, perhaps in both of these places, but at least in one of them. Now, Succoth, also known as Teru, was where the Egyptian army assembled in preparation for their military expeditions to the north. Armies consisted of a great deal of men, horses, and chariots, and they required a large area to assemble properly. Moshe well knew Teru, called Succoth in the biblical account, and it is considered that it was here that he organized the people for their journey, where they would have assembled before they set off. So indeed, on the first day, we see an assembly, a mikra. And we read in Exodus 14, and the Lord spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel that they turn and encamp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal Zephon, before it shall ye encamp by the sea. And I believe that the events that took place that saw the Israelites assembled and eventually triumphing over their enemies probably happened on the seventh day. And we know that they were encamped and assembled on what is looked at here, described as Nuwebi Beach. And in Exodus 14:10 we read about it. When Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. They were sore afraid, and the children of Israel cried unto the Lord. And the angel of God, which went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them, and the pillar of the cloud went from before their face and stood behind them. So they're all on this beach. They are assembled, obviously, and they're protected because the access point is being guarded by the Lord. And Moshe stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and he made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. The Lord said unto Moshe, stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. And Moshe stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to his strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it. And the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. And the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. But the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. It's a picture of artifacts found on the bed of the Sea of Reeds, if anyone's curious. And Israel saw that great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moshe. In Exodus 15 it says, they sang, Yeshir, Moshe and the children of Israel, this song unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously, the horse and his rider he hath thrown into the sea. Now I think the camping by the sea, the passing through the sea, and this celebration in Exodus 15 represent the seventh day Mikra, the seventh day assembling of Jehovah's people. The gathering that is called for in all subsequent generations, including ours, is, I believe, a chance to collectively come together and remember this great deliverance when they were gathered together and they celebrated what Jehovah had done for them. And it's something that we are to hold on to and we are to remember, which is why I went through some of the scriptures describing it there. But the argument is that there is the first mention of Mikra, the first mention of Mikra, a mention of not doing work, but that cooking is permitted. Okay, as we saw before, the first day there should be a holy convocation, Mikra, and on the seventh day there should be a holy convocation, Mikra, to you. No manner of work shall be done save that which every man must eat, that only may be done of you. And the argument reads, now in this first mention of Yehovah's holy convocations, cooking is clearly defined as work, but is just as clearly defined as work that is allowed to be done on no work shall be done days. Do you believe the allowance to cook was just for the generation coming out of Egypt on that first unleavened bread? If so, why? Remember, often in Scripture, time is not always clearly portrayed. Exodus 12, 1-20 are all one group of words Moshe was told to speak to the children of Israel. We see in verse 28 that the children of Israel did as Yehovah commanded Moshe. It seems people in general think the first generation was permitted to cook because they did not have time to prepare, because they were given the command right before it happened. That clearly isn't true. The children obeyed the command from Moshe, which included bringing in the lamb on the 10th day and keeping it for 4 days. I imagine Moshe was given the command on the first day of the first month. It would have taken at least a couple of days to distribute the command to all the people. Goshen isn't that small. It had many cities and was as big as a lot of small states. We aren't really told how it happened, but we are told that the people obeyed, which means everyone knew the command at least 4 days before the first day of unleavened bread, because they had time to bring in the lamb. Okay, so the argument is that everybody knew and therefore had time to prepare. I think it is safe to say that nobody really knows how events unfolded. I couldn't claim to. I don't suppose anybody really can. Or how information was disseminated, or what life was like in Egypt at the time. But we can get a good idea from reading about the events that are recorded in Scripture. That's what we've got that we know we can hold on to. We know that, namely, Egypt was in total chaos. Maybe everything was just fine in Goshen, and maybe all the Israelites got told well in advance. Who knows? I haven't got a clue. All we actually know, though, is what is written in Scripture. The instructions for keeping the feast included the command to eat unleavened bread. This is really important. Exodus 12, 15 and 18. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. So you've got to eat unleavened bread. And then again in verse 18. The first month from the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. You have to eat unleavened bread. These instructions to eat unleavened bread are repeated later in the Torah. Exodus 23, but you shall keep the feast of unleavened bread as I commanded you. You shall eat unleavened bread for 7 days at the appointed time in the month of Abib, for in it you came out of Egypt. None shall appear before me empty-handed. Leviticus 23, which we looked at before. On the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread to Yehovah. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation, a mikra, as we looked at. You shall not do any ordinary work. No repeat of the cooking exemption here, by the way. And that phrase we've looked at, don't do any ordinary work, is all work of any kind, don't do. And in verse 8, but you shall present a mincha to Yehovah for 7 days. On the seventh day is a holy convocation, a mikra. You shall not do any ordinary work. Again, no repeat of the cooking exemption. And again, I point you to the fact that any ordinary work, what it actually says is, all work of any kind, do not do. But I'm trying to point out the importance here of eating unleavened bread. Again, in Numbers 28, on the 15th day of this month is a feast. 7 days shall unleavened bread be eaten. Deuteronomy 16, you shall eat no leavened bread with it. 7 days you shall eat it with unleavened bread, the bread of affliction. For you came out of the land of Egypt in haste, that all the days of your life you may remember the day which you came out of the land of Egypt. So, it is important to eat unleavened bread in order to keep the Torah. Yeah. Here we also see the phrase, for you came out of the land of Egypt in haste. I think all the conjecture as to whether the people had time to be prepared or not is unimportant in light of what Scripture actually recounts. We read in Exodus 12, the Egyptians were urgent with the people to send them out of the land in haste, for they said, we shall all be dead. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading bowls being bound up in their cloaks on their shoulders. Please note, for they came out, they sent them out in haste, another mention of what we've just read there. And the people of Israel had also done as Moshe told them, for they had asked the Egyptians for silver and gold and jewelry and for clothing. And Yehovah had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they let them have what they asked. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. And the people of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. There you've got your mikra. A mixed multitude also went up with them, and very much livestock, both flocks and herds. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough that they had brought out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not wait, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. Maybe the people all knew beforehand. Maybe they were afforded less time, though, than they thought that they would have due to the urgency of the Egyptians. The Egyptians were urgent with the people to send them out of the land in haste. However you want to imagine it went, what we actually read is, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not wait, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. Indeed, when we keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread, one of the things that we're told that we are to remember as we eat the bread is that the people left in great haste. Yehovah knew that this generation would be unprepared. He is outside of time. When we keep the feast, we remember that they left in haste and we look back to these events. So to a people in the middle of the Exodus who Yehovah knows would be thrust out of Egypt and could not wait, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves, Yehovah says, on the first day there shall be a holy convocation, and on the seventh day there shall be a holy convocation to you. No manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat. What is it that they must eat? Unleavened bread. That only may be done of you. And when subsequent generations are commanded to keep the feast, we see no repeat of this allowance for cooking. Again, Leviticus 23, on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread to Yehovah. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. You are to do this. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work. No repeat of except cooking. And we know what no ordinary work is. It's saying on the first day you shall have holy convocation. All work of any kind, do not do. But you shall present a food offering to Yehovah for 7 days. On the seventh day is a holy convocation. And again, this thing at ordinary work, it's actually saying all work of any kind, do not do. And there is no repeat of this exemption for cooking. So am I saying that instructions were given to this generation that do not pertain to subsequent generations? The answer to that is simply yes. Think for a moment about the Passover itself. And here we have it, the Passover, Exodus 12. Yehovah said to Moshe and Aharon in the land of Egypt, this month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, every man shall take a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household. If the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the number of persons. According to what each can eat, you shall make your count for the lamb. The lamb shall be without blemish, a male a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. And you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. Then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they eat. They shall eat the flesh that night, roasted on the fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They shall eat it. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted its head with its legs and its inner parts. And you shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. And thus you shall eat it with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is Yehovah's Passover. So clearly we do not keep the Passover in the same way today. Clearly some instructions given in Torah were just for this generation. In fact, further commands for the Passover would obviously mark against doing this very thing. The commands for the feast for subsequent generations are actually given later in the Torah, and there is no rescinding, by the way, of this smearing your doorposts with blood, but we know not to do it because these things are not mentioned when the feast is mentioned again. And it goes on, for I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am Yehovah. The blood shall be a sign for you in the houses where you are, and when I see the blood I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Obviously Yehovah is talking to the generation of the Exodus here. This day shall be for you a memorial day, and this is the word H2146 Zikron, and you shall keep it as a feast to Yehovah throughout your generations, as a statute forever. You shall keep it as a feast. It's a memento, a memorial thing, a record. Then Yehovah tells this generation that they'll keep this feast throughout their generations as a memorial day. So Yehovah says that what this generation goes through and what Yehovah does for them will be remembered by those who are to come after them. Subsequent generations obviously would celebrate the feast without putting blood on their doorposts or without leaving Egypt in haste. Goes on, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove the leaven out of your houses. For if anyone eats what is leavened from the first until the seventh day, that person should be cut off from Israel. The first day you shall hold a holy assembly, and on the seventh day a holy assembly. No work shall be done on those days, but what everyone needs to eat, that alone may be prepared by you. So subsequent generations would celebrate the feast without putting blood on their doorposts or without leaving Egypt in haste. I believe that this allowance for cooking was given to the generation that left in haste with nothing prepared. I do not believe verse 16 sets a precedent for linking the mikras of Yehovah and thereby the Sabbaths with a license to cook. As we've seen, when this is actually mentioned again in Leviticus 23, it says, no work, no ordinary work, no work of any kind shall be done. One thing Exodus 12:16 does do, though, is to identify cooking as work. No work shall be done on those days, but what everyone needs to eat, that alone may be prepared by you. As we've noted before, this license to cook is not repeated when instructions on keeping the feast are given later in the Torah. This day shall be for you a memorial day, a memorial, a record. And here are our instructions for this Zikron. On the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread to Yehovah. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. The first day you shall hold a mikra, shall not do any ordinary work, no repeat of the cooking exemption. But you shall present a food offering to Yehovah for 7 days. On the seventh day is a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work. Again, no repeat. You shall not do any ordinary work. As we've said before, all work of any kind, do not do. Kal melacha avodah lo ta'asu. Another command that was given specifically to this generation, Exodus 16:29-30. See, Yehovah has given you the Sabbath, therefore on the sixth day he gives you bread for 2 days. Remain each of you in his place. Let no one go out of his place on the seventh day. So the people rested, they Shabbathed on the seventh day. That's that word that we looked at before, Shabbath. I can already hear the arguments. That is because they were only told not to gather the manna on the Sabbath. There's nothing about them cooking the manna on the Sabbath. We'll get to that, but for now, just note that we have another command here that is specific to this generation. Let no one go out of his place on the Sabbath, on the seventh day. Clearly, it is not transgression of Torah or sin to leave your home on the Sabbath. Luke 4. And he, Yeshua, taught in their synagogues, being glorified of all. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as was his custom, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for to read. So he went out of his place on the Sabbath. That's Yeshua, who was without sin. Let no one go out of his place on the seventh day. And yet we also read, we know that Moshe gets read every Sabbath in the synagogues in the times of the early church. Acts 15:21. So now on to Exodus 16. Here we find verses that cover the Sabbath and the manna. So back to the argument. You guys have taught in the past that Exodus 16 gives us an example of the Israelites cooking in advance of the Sabbath. I have already shown how this is a textbook case of eisegesis, and that in fact these verses seem to support the idea, that Yehovah's first allowance for cooking on no work days stood for all no work days. Okay, so this I have already shown remark that came in a prior email, and we'll take a look at this as well. Then it goes on to say, the argument says, outside of those verses in Exodus 16, there really aren't any verses that talk about the subject of cooking on the Sabbath. There aren't even any offhand references to them cooking ahead of a Sabbath anywhere. That leaves the only verse that supports the idea that we can't cook on the Sabbath is the verse that says that we can. Firstly, I just want to point out, well, I've put exegesis and exegesis. Well, exegesis and eisegesis. Exegesis and eisegesis are two common approaches in Bible study. Exegesis is the exposition or explanation of a text based on a careful textual analysis. The meaning of the text is only derived from its internal content. The word exegesis literally means to lead out of. That means the interpreter is led to his conclusions by following the text. The opposite approach to Scripture is eisegesis, which is the interpretation of a text based on a pre-existing narrative. The word eisegesis literally means to lead into, which means the interpreter interprets his own or someone else's ideas into the text, thus interpreting it to agree with a concept that comes from outside the text. So the argument is, you guys have taught in the past that Exodus 16 gives us an example of the Israelites cooking in advance of the Sabbath. And the verse in question is Exodus 16:23. We'll look at the whole chapter, but the verse in question is, and he said unto them, this is that which Yehovah hath said, tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto Yehovah. Bake that which you will bake today, and seethe that ye will seethe, and that which remains over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. So the argument is, you guys have taught in the past that Exodus 16 gives an example of the Israelites cooking in advance of the Sabbath. Okay, and then we've just read the verse. And he says, I've clearly shown that this is a textbook case of eisegesis. Is it? I don't think it is. He goes on to say, and that in fact these verses, and he's talking about a bigger section of the chapter, seem to support the idea that Yehovah's first allowance for cooking on no work days stood for all no work days. So let's get to these verses if we want to investigate this properly. Exodus 16. In the evening, quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? For they did know not what it was. And Moshe said to them, it is the bread that Yehovah has given you to eat. This is what Yehovah has commanded. Gather of it each one of you as much as he can eat. You shall each take an omer according to the number of the persons each of you has in his tent. And the people of Israel did so. They gathered some more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. Each of them gathered as much as he could eat. And Moshe said to them, let no one leave any of it over till the morning. They did not listen to Moshe. Some left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms and stank, and Moshe was angry with them. Morning by morning they gathered each as much as he could eat, but when the sun grew hot, it melted. And on the sixth day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers each, and when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moshe, he said to them, this is what Yehovah has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to Yehovah. Bake what you will bake and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till the morning. So before we go on to read the next 2 verses, I will show you how these verses are presented in the argument. Okay, and I'll read the section from the argument now. I've highlighted in blue the common subject of all these passages, as you can see, and added a couple of its when the subject is implied to help show that for 11 verses we are talking about the manna. Thing is that this and bread, all of these terms, thing, it, that, this, and bread, all of these terms are used to describe or in reference to the manna. Okay, so I'll leave that up for a minute. As I said, this is the most comprehensive argument that I've come across for the idea that we can cook on the Sabbath. The reason I'm pointing this out is because we have used verse 23 to say that the scripture instructs us to cook twice as much food to lay the food over for the Sabbath. And there is verse 23. He said to them, this is what Yehovah said, tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto Yehovah. Bake that which you will bake today, and seethe that which you will seethe, and that which remains over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. This interpretation of these verses, however, is a classic example of reading what you already believe to be true into the scriptures. That's his claim against eisegesis. If you follow the subject, the scriptures are consistently using manna as the subject, which is why he highlighted all those words in blue. I have no doubt you wouldn't argue that the first 2 examples of that which I have highlighted in verse 23 are referencing the manna. Okay, that which the Lord had said, tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath. Bake that, so manna, which you will bake, and seethe that manna, which you will seethe. Yet we interpret the third highlighted that to mean the cooked cakes or stew, and that which remaineth. That's what he's referring to. I'm just trying to make his point as clear as possible. The interpretation is not supported by Scripture, however. There is nothing in verse 23 that would indicate that the third highlighted that is anything other than the manna. I'll put the verse back up again for your deliberation. For even more clarification, we can look at verses 24 and 25. And they laid it up until the morning, as Moshe bade, and it did not stink, neither was there any worm therein. And Moshe said, eat that today, for today is a Sabbath unto Yehovah. Today you shall not find it in the field. But before we go any further, let's just remind ourselves that we have been reading the King James Version of the Bible. Maybe some of you are convinced by the text of the King James Version of Exodus 16:23 that you have a perfect understanding of what is being implied. Well, remember, Scripture was written in Hebrew. Also, you can pick which version of Hebrew. Even if it was written in the English, the third that is a new that, because it's talking about which remains. But, well, that's another point. Here we go. This is the Hebrew written down here. Now, I'm going to point out that here we have the et, the aleph tav, the sign of the definite direct object, not translated in English, but generally preceding and indicating the accusative. Maybe to you it's just as obvious in the Hebrew that it is declaring that they never kept anything boiled or baked, just uncooked manna. So we read, and all that remains, lay up for yourselves to be kept until the morning. And all this was pointing in on this word that. But in Hebrew there is no all that. We just have the word kal, which means all. So that actually isn't even in the Hebrew. All remains, lay up for yourselves. And it's worth looking that there are other translations as well, which we obviously know. Young's literal translation said to them, it is which Yehovah had spoken, rest the holy Sabbath to Yehovah. Tomorrow that which ye bake, bake. That which you will boil, boil. All that is over, let rest for yourselves in charge till the morning. And the Septuagint, Moshe said to them, it is not with the word with which spoke tomorrow the Sabbath, a holy rest to Yehovah. Bake that which you will bake, seethe which you will seethe, and all that is over to be laid by for the morrow. So we've got all these people who are taking the Hebrew and translating it in all these different ways, and we're putting all this on this word that isn't even actually there. And the question that really comes to mind when we deliberate on this particular thing is, why even bother mention cooking the day before the Sabbath if it's cool to cook all the time, including on the Sabbath itself? If cooking on the Sabbath is perfectly fine, why make a point of mentioning cooking the day before the Sabbath? And he said to them, that is the day which, this is that which Yehovah had said, tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto Yehovah. Bake that which you will bake today, and seethe that which you will seethe, and that which remains over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. Why make a big point? So back to the argument on these verses here. These two verses directly describe the third highlighted that in verse 23. That which remaineth. It is manna that verse 20 describes as breeding worms and stinking. It is manna that is found in the fields in verses 13 and 14. Let's look at verse 23 again with this understanding. So the way now translated is, and he said unto them, this is that which Yehovah had said, tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto Yehovah. Bake the manna which ye will bake today, and seethe the manna ye will seethe, and the manna which remains over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. Once the subject is understood, it becomes clear that the manna is to be kept over and thus would require cooking on the Sabbath. This is his argument. Okay, so I'm perfectly fine to go with that translation of verse 23. If that's, it doesn't really make any odds to me. I pointed out, though, that the word that isn't actually even there in the Hebrew, and there's all different ways of translating it, and the Hebrew is not really, it's not King James English anyway, is it? But let's go with that anyway. So the manna which remains over lay up for yourselves to be kept until the morning. Now my first point is, boiled and baked manna is still manna. It's just manna, isn't it? So you can read that, and the manna which remains over, lay up for yourself to be kept until the morning. That's fine. Doesn't get a name change when you cook it. Second point, how do we know that cooked manna didn't stink and go bad? From my reading of the text, whether or not the food goes bad is not determined by anything other than Yehovah's decree. Okay. Point 3. I think there is something wrong with the following statement. Once the subject is understood, it becomes clear that the manna is to be kept over and thus would require cooking on the Sabbath. Okay, so let's say that what is left is uncooked manna. Where does the presumption that it needs to be cooked come from? I have no idea. So I'm going to use my common sense. Not that I've been blessed with loads of it. Okay, Friday morning the manna comes down. I get twice as much as normal. I'm told that on Friday I can boil and bake that which I want to. If I'm boiling and baking anyway on Friday and I've got twice as much and I'm not allowed to make a fire on the Sabbath, maybe I can keep one burning, but that might be a hassle and might go wrong. And it's a day when I'm commanded to rest. I don't think it would take me very long to come up with a plan. Cook for the rest of Friday and make sure there's some for tomorrow. Maybe save a little uncooked stuff back as it's nice anyway, and maybe I can cook some after sundown on Saturday. Remember that no more is actually going to come until Sunday morning. In Exodus 16, we have mention of the Sabbath and we have mention of what to do the day before the Sabbath. Whatever the object in the sentences, we have clear instructions to cook the day before the Sabbath, but no clear instructions about cooking on the Sabbath. Exodus 16:23. He said to them, "This is that which Yehovah hath said, tomorrow is the rest, the Shabbathon, the Sabbath observance of the holy Sabbath unto Yehovah. Bake that which you will bake today, and seethe that which you will seethe, and that which remains over lay up for you to be kept until the morning." Only the command, Shabbathon, observe the Sabbath, don't work. From Exodus 12:16, we see that cooking is work. So back to the argument. Let's not stop there, though. We have to look at the context as well. All that is going on in context of the previous verses has Yah laying out a test for the Israelites, a test in regarding them keeping his Sabbath. Okay, and this is Exodus 16:4 is what he refers to. Then said Yehovah to Moshe, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or no." The argument again. We can see from earlier in the chapter in verse 4, Yah said that he is going to prove the Israelites, to test them in whether they will walk in his law. Everything that has been going on in verses 13 to 25 that we've just been discussing have been setting up this test. A test to know if his people would follow his law, specifically if they'd obey his Sabbath. So here it is, 16:26. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, which is the Sabbath, in it there shall be none. So now we see how Yah is going to prove the Israelites. In verse 25, the Israelites are told it is a Sabbath, and verse 26 commands them to gather for 6 days, but there won't be any to gather on the 7th day, which is a Sabbath. Note a couple more "it's" referring to manna. The Israelites have already been told back in chapter 12 that no work shall be done on a Sabbath, and now here in verse 26 we are given insight into what Yah sees as work for this group of people. 6 days you shall gather. We also have insight from chapter 12 that tells us that cooking is work too, don't we? The focus of the test Yah laid out for the Israelites to see whether they would keep his Sabbaths or not was about gathering. If we read further, we can see why. Exodus 16:31. And the house of Israel called the name thereof manna, and it was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Numbers 11. And the manna was as coriander seed, and the colour thereof is the colour of bdellium. The focus of the test being, will they gather manna or not, does not mean that this is the only way that they can break the Sabbath. That's kind of like what the argument is kind of focusing on. The argument continues by pointing out that gathering the manna would be difficult and therefore can be described as work. The suggestion perhaps being that things that are easier than this are not work. So here's the argument. We're told the manna was like coriander seed. Coriander seeds are incredibly small. I believe I could probably fit 5 or 6 of them on my thumbnail. So something as small as that lays on the dew spread out in the fields, and the Israelites had to go and gather it. It wouldn't be much different than somebody today taking handfuls of wheat berries and throwing them into the field and then trying to regather them. It would be incredibly time consuming, and you would probably be hunched over or crawling on the ground the whole time. No one, and I mean no one, would not look at this as work. So I just want to point out the level of difficulty in gathering the manna is absolutely and utterly irrelevant. Simply, Yehovah commanded them not to do it. The argument goes on. Yet this was still an incredible blessing of supernatural provision, and exactly how the scriptures say the Israelites were tested. Would they go out to gather on the Sabbath? We see the answer. So we'll read it, Exodus 16. And it came to pass that they went out, some of the people, on the seventh day to gather, and found none. And the Lord said to Moshe, how long refuse ye to keep my commandments and my laws? Now, what bearing this has on whether we can cook on the Sabbath or not, I actually really don't know. I'm pretty lost. The verse that follows is the one that we mentioned earlier as an example of commands given specifically to this generation. See, for that Yehovah had given you the Sabbath, therefore he gives you on the 6th day the bread of 2 days. Abide ye every man in his place, let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. So, whether or not it's difficult to pick up manna and gather it or not is irrelevant. To actually make the suggestion that the only thing that they could do to break the Sabbath was to gather it, I don't understand whatsoever. We know from the verses that we have read that we shall not work on the Sabbath. We know these Israelites were coming out of Egypt and didn't understand Yah's laws or commands, so Yah said he would test them. So the test wasn't about whether they understood. They were capable of understanding Yehovah's commands. After all, they put blood on their doorposts. The test was to see what was in their hearts. And the argument continues. And we see that this test and their failure, which was about obeying his command to keep the Sabbath, was about gathering. Never is cooking mentioned in regards to Yah's test of keeping the Sabbath. Okay. The way in which Yehovah chose to test the hearts of the people of this particular generation does not imply that he was or is okay about all other activities, no matter what they were or are in regards to gathering the Sabbath. I think that's a fair statement, isn't it? Maybe he's testing the hearts of people in subsequent generations in different ways. The argument switches then to a discussion about the Hebrew word for work, H4399, melakha. So, lastly, I want to talk about the definition of work, H4399, melakha. I really don't believe it matters what the definition is, because Yah has already said that cooking is okay. That being said, I still do not understand why you use industrious as your definition as to what Yah means by H4399. He's referring to comments that JP's made, and he's actually used the word industriousness. I know it is an option in Strong's or Blue Letter for the definition, but why is it the one you pick? Industrious or industriousness are both adjectives. They're not a thing. I understand the importance of following the scriptures and the seriousness of verses like Exodus 31:15. But when you slide industrious as H4399, it kind of becomes meaningless. So he's made the statement there that industrious or industriousness are both adjectives, but actually industriousness is actually a noun. So, firstly, I personally have never discussed the meaning of melakha, but we should come back to that. But for now, I'd like us to look at the verse that was just mentioned and a few verses before it and after it, which are all about the seriousness of keeping the Sabbath. Exodus 31, you shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy unto you. Everyone that defiles it shall surely be put to death. For whoever does, asa, any work, melakha, therein that soul shall be cut off from among his people. Okay, so you're not to do any melakha. 6 days, work, melakha may be done, asa, but in the 7th is the Sabbath rest, the Shabbaton, holy to Yehovah. Whosoever does any melakha in the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath to observe the Sabbath throughout the generations for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days Yehovah made the heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. Again, taking us back to the creation account. Just as in the fourth word, we see the command to keep the Sabbath to Shabbat connected to the creation account, where Shabbat is what? To desist from exertion. And from what we looked at earlier, to Shabbat seems to be out less in the sense that is to take away, put away, lacking, put down, rid. It is about ceasing, it is about resting. And in the fourth word found in our parsha, we saw also that as well as resting, Shabbating, as read in Genesis 2:2-3 and Exodus 31:17, Yehovah's rest is also described as H5117 Nuach. So we saw it there. Okay. Exodus 20. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days thou shalt labor. This is that word abad, which is related to the word avodah, from where we got our definition of what no ordinary work or servile work really means. And do all your work. The seventh day is a Sabbath, a Shabbat to Yehovah your God. On it you shall not do any work, melakat, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days Yehovah made Asah, the heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested, Nuach, that word that we just mentioned, on the seventh day. Therefore Yehovah blessed the Sabbath day, and he made it holy. From what we looked at earlier, Nuach, not working, to rest as in to settle upon, rest as in lack of conflict and troubles, rest as in such as brings delight to the soul. And there we got it again, primitive root to rest, to settle down, used in a great many translations. The use of this word to describe Yehovah's rest, the rest that has already been described as Shabbat, tells me that something bigger than the definition of a single word is at play when we consider the Sabbath and resting. Again, I think there's a danger in trying to figure out and minimize the meaning of a word. Oh, this is what it means. So, when actually in this case we see that the Sabbath is about Shabbating, and it's also described as being about Nuaching, and we can see the whole host of things that's actually revealing to us about what it truly means to do what Yehovah did to keep the Sabbath. Exodus 29, this is interesting to me as well. 6 days you shall labor, abad, and do all your work, melacha. So that's what you do the rest of the week. On the seventh day is a Sabbath, a Shabbat to Yehovah your God. On it you shall not do any ordinary work. Okay, so in verse 9 we've got, in the 6 days you shall abad and melacha. On the seventh day it's just saying you just don't do any melacha. So verse 10 says that all we have to cease from is melacha. But verse 9 implies that on the seventh day, the Sabbath, we won't be abading either. Can you see that from what is written? Because you've got 6 days to do that. Clearly, that's not something that you're going to do on the seventh day. So to try to focus in on what melakah means in order to see what is permitted on the Sabbath seems to me to be completely missing the point. You've got 6 days to be abading. Abading means any form of work. And 6 days to melakah. But on the seventh day, just don't melakah. In other words, don't do work, full stop. It's worth noting that where we see that no melakah is to be done, then verse 9 implies that no abading is to be done either. So you can limit the meaning of what melakah is all you like, but it's actually related to the word abadim, which means any work. 6 days you shall labor, abad, and do all your work, melakah. Abad, work in any sense. Seventh day is a Sabbath, a Shabbat to Yehovah your God. On it you shall not do any melakah. Again, I stress that in trying to investigate words in order to discover what can be done and still constitutes resting on the Sabbath is, to me, completely missing what the Sabbath is all about. But just to be clear, as mentioned earlier, abad is where you get the word avodah from. Abad, to work in any sense, avodah, work of any kind, which is useful in getting a more accurate translation of what is often rendered servile. Ordinary work may be done, as we saw before. All work of any kind, don't do. So, from Exodus 29 to 10, no melakah implies no abading or avodaing. To put it another way, on the Sabbath, all work of any kind, don't do. That's effectively what has been said in the fourth word of the Parsha, Yitro. And back to the argument. Exodus 35:33 seems to give us a clue when it states, make a cunning work. So again, this is about the discussion of melakah, because work there is H4399. Same chapter, same H6213 in front of it, like the don't do, that's what I saw, don't do any work verses. Same writer dictating from the mouth of the Creator, but this time with an adjective clearly in front to show that H4399 is definitely a thing, a noun. Work is something definable and not just an idea fluttering about in the sky that can mean whatever to whoever. Strong's and Blue Letter both offer plenty of noun definitions like business, service, occupation. And when they use work, they put parentheses with something done or made next to it to show it's a noun form of work. The definition is most likely your occupation, as in that which occupies your time the other 6 days of the week. I would say that there is a danger, and this is me speaking now, in defining melakah as your occupation. It tends to lead people to saying things like, well, it's okay, it's not like I'm going to take any money for it. Also, to tend to see work as a noun is okay if you produce something. Look at this cunning work, said the artisan. But what about someone who works on a telephone helpline or a psychiatric nurse? Work, as in even in the noun form, is related obviously to a verb, isn't it? The noun industriousness, and it is a noun, is appropriate given its correlation to the verb shabath, which means to cease from activity and exertion. So I think it's the best word to use. And that's what shabathing is all about, after all, to desist from exertion. The inclusion of the word abad in the fourth word, there you have it, 6 days you shall abad. In other words, you won't be doing it on the seventh day. Should satisfy most people who think that melakah is just referring to your paid job, to the fact that the Sabbath rest includes more than just not earning or doing that which you are usually paid for. Because abad, as we've said, is work in any sense. And back to the argument. I believe that the scriptures actually teaches that cooking is allowed on all Sabbaths. My points are simple and as follows. Exodus 12:16 is the only verse that directly addresses cooking on the Sabbaths, and this verse says that cooking is allowed. Exodus 16:13-30 gives us an example that implies the people would have been cooking on each Sabbath, all in the context of a Sabbath observance test, where gathering is the only described work they did. Please note, if gathering is melakah, or work, then melakah is not one's occupation. It is used of activity, exertion, or industriousness. That's just to pick up on a point there. And I would say Exodus 12:16 clearly defines cooking as work. This is what I would say. The generation who left Egypt in great haste with an onus on them to eat unleavened bread for 7 days were allowed to prepare this as they fled. No repeat of cooking allowance. Indeed, in Leviticus 23, we read with regards to the first and 7th days of unleavened bread, all work of any kind, don't do. Exodus 16:13-30 gives an example of the people being told to bake and boil the food the day before the Sabbath. Why mention cooking the day before the Sabbath if cooking on the Sabbath is fine? The test as to whether the people would attempt to gather on the Sabbath does not imply that cooking was perfectly fine on the Sabbath. So back to the argument. Yehovah has given us his feasts. Now it can be debated whether these moed are actual feasts or festivals like defined by Strong's. We looked at what feast was before. These are called assemblies. What can't be debated though is that Yehovah calls his people to meet with him on the feasts, and Yehovah sets his feasts to line up with the harvests that happen around the same time. His people are called to bring the first fruits of their harvest to the temple and to rejoice before him, to give thanks to Yehovah for his generous provision and the blessing of the harvest, even calling his people to eat of this harvest while rejoicing before him. The first time Yehovah mentioned his feast, he told us we could do no work except cooking. I say no. Yehovah told those coming out of Egypt in haste that they could cook, which is defined as work, on the first and seventh day of unleavened bread. But back to his argument. This allowance for cooking to be done makes sense when we learn later that we are to rejoice before Yehovah with our harvests and to eat of the same harvest on these feast days. You, however, are teaching that we should, or would if we could, do all these things, bring the harvest, thank Yehovah for it, rejoice over the blessings of it, eat of it, but do not cook it. Okay. So the argument is that we're to bring the first fruits of our harvest before Yehovah and then rejoice with it. Therefore, we have to cook on the Sabbaths. So let's look at the harvests, the harvest feast, beginning with the Feast of First Fruits, which is all about the barley harvest. Leviticus 23, 9-14 deals with this. There's no mention of it being a holy convocation or refraining from any work, so it's not a Sabbath, so we'll move on. Shavuot is the wheat harvest. Leviticus 23, you shall bring from your dwelling places 2 loaves of bread to be waved, made of 2 tenths of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour, and they shall be baked with leaven as first fruits to Yehovah. And you shall present with the bread 7 lambs a year old without blemish, and 1 bull from the herd, and 2 rams. They shall be a burnt offering to Yehovah with their grain offering and their drink offering, a food offering with a pleasing aroma to Yehovah. You shall offer 1 male goat for a sin offering and 2 male lambs a year old as a sacrifice of peace offerings. Who was involved in the offerings that I just mentioned there? We know it's the Levites. So there was cooking done on the Sabbaths, and it was done by the Levites. And we see Yeshua actually talking around the subject of food as well in Matthew 12, saying to the Pharisees, or have you not read in the law, in the Torah, that on the Sabbath day the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? Okay, let's go on about Shavuot. The priest shall wave them with the bread of the first fruits as a wave offering before Yehovah. With the 2 lambs they shall be holy to Yehovah for the priest. And you shall make a proclamation on the same day. You shall hold a holy convocation, this mikra. You shall not do Asa, any ordinary work, Melachah. It is a statute forever in all your dwelling places throughout your generations. That actually says, all work of any kind, do not do. There is no mention of anything that suggests that once you have waved your loaves, then you need to go off and cook some of the rest of the wheat in order to rejoice. If we go back to verse 17, you shall bring from your dwelling places 2 loaves of bread to be waved, made of 2 tenths of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour, and they shall be baked with leaven as first fruits to Yehovah. When do you think the baking of the loaves was done? When do you think the grinding of the wheat into fine flour was done? The people knew how to prepare for the feasts. Preparation before a Sabbath is actually a thing mentioned in Scripture, Mark 15. And now when the evening was come, because it was the preparation par asque, that is the day before the Sabbath, pro-Sabbaton. Now we've got pro-Sabbaton, Sabbath Eve, the day before the Sabbath. And here we've got this word for preparation. Readiness, preparation, making ready, preparation, equipping that which is prepared. Okay, and it comes from this word. It's a derivative, to furnish, to decide, to get ready, to prepare yourself, to make ready, to make oneself ready, to prepare, to make oneself ready. Pretty extensive. Matthew 26:62. Now the next day that followed the day of the preparation, this getting ready, making everything ready, the chief priests and the Pharisees came together unto Pilate. John 19. And it was the preparation, okay, this thing that's linked to the day before the Sabbath, about the 6th hour, and he said unto the Jews, behold your king. Again in John 19, the Jews therefore, because it was the what? Preparation, that the body should not remain upon the cross on the Sabbath day. Again, it's talking about the day before a Sabbath. In fact, in Luke 23 we read, and that day was the preparation, the same word, and the Sabbath drew on. So the preparation is the day before the Sabbath, preparing for this feast day of Yehovah. The women also which came with him from Galilee followed after and beheld the sepulchre and how his body was laid. And they returned and prepared spices and ointments and rested the Sabbath day according to the commandment. So they wouldn't prepare spices on the Sabbath, not even to treat Yeshua's body. Now upon the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they came to the sepulchre bringing the spices which they prepared, and certain others with them. And they returned and prepared spices and ointments, and they rested, and this is Hesu Kadzo. the Sabbath according to the commandment, to keep still, to refrain from labor, cease, hold peace, be quiet, rest. Also translated, they held their peace. They took him and healed him and let him go. And it's from G2272, Hasu Chaos, which is all about being quiet and tranquil. So let's go back to the argument that we're to bring the first fruits of our harvest before Yehovah and then rejoice with it. Therefore, we have to cook on the Sabbaths. Looked at the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. So what of the fruit harvest that comes in the autumn? The last three feasts are mentioned in Leviticus 23 to 44, if you want to read them at a later point. But we get a good picture of what is going on in Deuteronomy and this whole idea of having to cook on the Sabbaths. Deuteronomy 26, when you come into the land that Yehovah your God is giving you for an inheritance and have taken possession of it and live in it, you shall take some of the first of all the fruit of the ground which you harvest from your land that Yehovah your God is giving you, and you shall put it in a basket, and you shall go to the place that Yehovah your God will choose to make his name dwell there. Obviously it's talking about Jerusalem. You shall go to the priest who is in office at the time and say to him, I declare today that Yehovah your God, that I have come into this land, that Yehovah swore to our fathers to give us. Then the priest shall take the basket from your hand and set it down before the altar of Yehovah your God. And then we have the liturgy. You shall make repose before Yehovah your God. A Syrian ready to perish was my father, and he went down into Egypt and sojourned there with a few, and became there a nation great, mighty, and populous. And the Egyptians treated us harshly and humiliated us and laid on us hard labor. And we cried to Yehovah, the God of our fathers, and Yehovah heard our voice and saw our affliction, our toil, and our oppression. And Yehovah brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with great deeds of terror and signs and wonders. It's worth mentioning as we go through this, you'll see over and over again, the Lord commands us to remember these things, and this is all about remembering these things, and it's important for us to remember them too. And he brought us into this place, and he gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And behold, now I bring the first of the fruit of the ground, which you, O Yehovah, had given me. Okay, so it's all about recognition that this, Lord, is all down to your great provision and your great kindness. And you shall set it down before Yehovah your God, and you shall worship before Yehovah your God. Okay, so you bring it in, you say, thank you, Lord, this is all because of you. And you set it down and you worship. You shall rejoice in all the good that Yehovah your God has given to you and your house, you and the Levite and the sojourner who is among you. Again, there's nothing here to suggest that there is a need to go off and cooking on the Sabbath. So let's look at this. You shall rejoice in all the good that Yehovah your God has given to you and to your house and the Levite and the sojourner who is among you. So this is all about focusing on all that Yehovah has done for us. Begins with remembering that he rescued us and the whole story. That's why the person is to recount it. The first of the 10 words reminds us of the importance of recognizing that Yehovah is our Elohim and he rescued us. We read it before. God spoke all these words saying, I am Yehovah your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Part of this remembering that we are rescued actually is in keeping the Sabbath too. In Deuteronomy 5 it says, you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Yehovah your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore Yehovah your God commands you to keep the Sabbath day. Okay, and again, looking at this verse, you shall rejoice in all the good that Yehovah your God has given to you and your house, you and the Levite and the sojourner who is among you. Now, the Hebrew word for rejoice is samach, H8055, and you can see it there written in the Hebrew. A few chapters later, in the midst of the curses, we see the related word H8057, simcha, translated as joy. Deuteronomy 28. Because you did not serve Yehovah your Elohim with joy, and this is that word simcha, and it's actually made from the same letters as you can see there, and gladness of heart for the abundance of everything, therefore you shall serve your enemies. We can see by looking to the Hebrew that to rejoice is all about expressing joy and gratitude. And even from what it describes, that is required of you to bring all this stuff and say, Lord, you did this, it's all because of you. Thank you for all that you've done for your people and all that you've done for me here. And presenting this, I recognize that this is all about you. And that's what rejoicing is all about. It's all about gratitude and joy for what Yehovah has done for you. We also gain some insights into how things work with regards to the feasts here in Deuteronomy 14. You shall tithe all the yield of your seed that comes from the field year by year. And before Yehovah your God, in the place that he will choose, Jerusalem, to make his name dwell there, you shall eat the tithe of your grain, of your wine, and of your oil, and the firstborn of your herd and flock, that you may learn to fear Yehovah your God always. So it says there that you eat the tithe of your grain. Does this mean we will be cooking on the Sabbath, or is what we eat already prepared? Do we make the wine on the day? Because we're to celebrate with that as well. Or do we press the oil for the olives the same day? This is going to be a very busy day, and actually I don't think you can make wine that quick. We also get a good look at how all this worked in Nehemiah 10. We obligate ourselves to bring the first fruits of our ground and the first fruits of all the fruit of every tree year by year to the house of Yehovah. Also to bring to the house of our God, to the priests who ministered in the house of our God, the firstborn of our sons and of our cattle, as is written in the Torah, and the firstborn of our herds and of our flocks. Remember what we looked at before, Matthew 12:5. And to bring the first of our dough and our contributions, the fruit of every tree, the wine and the oil, to the priests, to the chambers of the house of our God, and to bring to the Levites the tithes from our ground, for it is the Levites who collect the tithes in all our towns where we labor. Again, there they are bringing wine and oil and all these things they bring to the Levites. The priest, the son of Aharon, shall be with the Levites when the Levites receive the tithes, and the Levites shall bring up the tithe of the tithes to the house of our God, into the chambers of the storehouse. These people, being reacquainted with the Torah, they seem to really get a grasp of it. It's not confusing to them. The people of Israel and the sons of Levi shall bring the contribution of grain, wine, and oil to the chambers where the vessels of the sanctuary are, as well as the priests who minister, the gatekeepers and the singers. We will not neglect the house of our God. Okay, so back to Deuteronomy 14. And if the way is too long for you, so that you are not able to carry the tithe, when Yehovah your God blesses you, because the place is too far from you, which Yehovah your God chooses to set his name there, then you shall turn it into money and bind up the money in your hand and go to the place that Yehovah your God chooses. Okay, so this in itself is like telling us something quite important. It's not necessary to take your tithe and to then go and cook it on the day. You can actually even turn it into money and spend the money for whatever you desire, oxen or sheep or wine or strong drink, whatever your appetite craves. And you shall eat before Yehovah your God and rejoice. So there is absolutely no need in being told to rejoice before Yehovah, to take some corn and whatever and make a big meal on a Sabbath day. You can actually, the day before, turn it all into money and then actually buy something to eat, you and your household. There is no need to be cooking on a Sabbath in order to rejoice during the feasts. Final point of the argument. While I believe all you need to understand that cooking is allowed on the Sabbath is the verses, if you say Yah has prohibited cooking on the Sabbath, the implications are not limited. Okay. So he says, how does not allowing his people to cook on the Sabbath reflect Yah's character? Are we really meant to have leftovers for his feasts? Is the marriage supper going to be decked out in leftovers? So he then goes on to say, covenants always include eating meals together, and in fact eating together is used throughout Scripture to represent closeness between people. Covenants always include eating meals together. That is actually not true. I don't know whether that's something that has come from what Matthew Nolan teaches, or I don't know. Are we not to eat together on his set-apart festivals, which include the Sabbath? Should we not bless each other, give each other our best, including meals? This point here. How does not allowing his people to cook on the Sabbath reflect Yah's character? So I just put, how does the Sabbath, which was made for man, a wonderful gift, reflect on Yehovah's character if I have to prepare food beforehand because I'm told work is to be done? Are we really meant to be having leftovers for his feast? Is the marriage supper going to be decked out in leftovers? Who's having leftovers? James cooks for his family at home on Friday, and while he is, by the way, James is, for people watching online, he does a lot of cooking, as does, I've mentioned you there because I'm grateful for all of you, Gemma, Jilly and Mel. So James cooks for his family at home on Friday, and while he's at it, he cooks for us here on the Sabbath, as does Gemma, Jilly and Mel. None of us are eating what was scraped off their plates. Oh, stick that, they can eat that tomorrow. Well, I hope not. Covenants always include eating meals, as I've just said, that isn't true, together, and in fact eating together is used throughout Scripture to represent closeness between people. Who is suggesting that we can't eat together? We eat together every Sabbath, don't we? Nice food. Are we not to eat together on his set-apart festivals, which include the Sabbath? Should we not bless each other, give each other our best, including meals? Nobody is suggesting that you can't have great food, but the Sabbath is about so much more than just food. It's set apart, it's blessed, and it's about identifying with Yehovah, the creator of all things, and resting as he did, Shabbathing and Nuaching. So back to the argument. While it may be easy for us to preserve food, it hasn't always been. We know Yahweh's commands are not a burden, nor do they change. Yet in my limited keeping of the feast, there have been times not preparing food on the Sabbath has been very difficult, especially when you have 2 back-to-back Sabbaths. Imagine how difficult it would have been back when the Israelites had to make 3 pilgrimages a year on foot with no modern conveniences, with weather and other unexpected things popping up in biblical times. Well, we read in Deuteronomy 14, if it's too long for you the way, you can turn it into money anyway. Some of them trying to attend the pilgrimage feasts from the outskirts of the land, making a 7-day feast last 3 weeks or more, with days in between your travels when you weren't allowed to cook. You would naturally have rainy days and the goat getting into your food stores and countless other mishaps. And he puts, does it really make sense? Okay, and I'll just put that in then. If the way is too long for you and you're not able to carry the tithe, all these things are considerations the Lord has. And that argument in itself, it sounds a bit like a conversation I had with somebody who thought keeping the Sabbath was mad, and they were saying things like, so what if your car runs out of petrol on the Sabbath? The people were more than capable, as are we, more than capable of being able to keep the Sabbaths without having to cook. I'm sure that people knew exactly how to preserve food as well, and you only have to think about the Shemitah year to figure that out. And then he says, does it really make sense? It makes sense that we've been given a day, a set-apart day, a day that is blessed, a day in which the emphasis is on resting in all those different ways that the word encompasses. It makes perfect sense because that's what Yehovah prescribed for us. If we even just take what is written in the 4th word of the Parsha Yitro today, you've got 6 days to do all your abading, any form of work, and all your melekah. The Sabbath is holy, it's different, it's special, it's set apart. So in answer to the question, does it really make any sense? Sometimes there might be things in the word that might make us, I don't know, scratch our heads, make us think and think, I don't get it. Well, we come back to this, Isaiah 55. My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares Yehovah. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. And I know that the person who's made this argument knows this and believes this and is completely on board with this. And in fact, I believe that the person who made this argument is actually just searching out for the truth, but obviously finds it difficult to imagine why the Lord has made things this way in this particular case, in this particular instance with regards to cooking. Again, this verse should speak to everybody. Now, I don't know if it's the case here with the one making the argument, but it's worth pointing out that sometimes in order to walk in obedience to Yehovah, letting go of something that is precious to us is required. And I do get the impression from the way the argument was presented that cooking is a big thing. But sometimes in order to walk in obedience to Yehovah, letting go of something that is precious to us is required. Maybe we can't see the sense in what is being asked of us, what is expected of us. Yehovah tests our hearts. When we trust him That is when we find real freedom and peace. And it's only when we step out in faith that it all starts to make complete sense. And where we find ourselves always exceeds our expectations. When we just surrender to him. And his commands, with regards to them being burdensome, we know that they're not burdensome. But to Yaakov, going to meet Esau was burdensome. This thing that he was going to do, to his mind, was like a burdensome thing. Like, oh no, this is terrible. But in reality, it wasn't a burden. Struggling with it and overcoming was actually what made him Israel. Deuteronomy 19. So simple. Now therefore, if you will indeed shema my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people. Deuteronomy 28. And if you faithfully shema the voice of Yehovah your God, being careful to do all his commandments that I command you today, Yehovah your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you obey, if you shema the voice of Yehovah your God. So I'm pretty sure that the person who's made the argument would be disappointed that I didn't come out and agree with the argument that was being made. But I just want to reiterate that the whole of this part of the teaching has been about examining what Yehovah's word says, so that we can come to a truth, so that we can actually shema his voice. And I'm sure that the person who made the argument, that's all that they really want to do deep down. So I hope I've presented clearly enough the fact that I believe the word says that cooking on the Sabbath, any form of work, is not something that we should be doing. And we'll finish with this. The Lord takes pleasure in those who fear him. And if you don't know what it is to fear him, again, I'll take you back to that teaching when we discuss it. It's those people who love him, those people who cherish him, those people who are prepared to walk in his ways, those people who are surrendered to him. And the Lord takes pleasure in those people who hope in his what? In his hesed, in his mercy, and in his goodness. So I hope that Yehovah will take pleasure in us in our endeavour to discover what it is, his will for our lives. Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, more than anything, the thing that I want to pray, asking for right now, is that for all those people who might disagree with this, and for the person specifically who made the argument, and the people who might have also been joined with him, in agreement with him, I ask, Lord, that you'd help them to understand that I'm not trying to attack any of them. That's the furthest thing that I would want. And you know I've been worried about it, Lord, that they'd think that. Lord, I pray that if they feel like that, then you would reassure them it's not the case, and that you'd comfort them. And Lord, I thank you for your word, and I thank you for your Sabbath, and I thank you for what it is that you give us when you give us this day of resting. It's a blessing from you, Lord, and we just seek to take hold of it and to truly celebrate it in the way that you would have us to do so. Lord, I thank you for all that you do for us. Thank you, Lord, for helping me get through this, because this was difficult for me, because I knew people would be upset by it. But Lord, I thank you. I thank you, Lord, for calling me to do what you called me to do. Lord, I pray that you will bless your people who hear this. I thank you, Lord, for your great mercy and your kindness towards us. We hope in it, Lord. Bless your holy name. Amen.